Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a well-known and respected best-selling author from Washington, D.C., USA, Mr. Steven Gaffney. Steven, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Steven is an author of a book titled Unconditional Power, and we'll speak about this book today. He's an esteemed expert in change management, honest communication, and high performing teams. And before this book, Steven has another 4 books, including Just Be Honest, Authentic Communication Strategies That Get Results and Last a Lifetime, Honesty Works, Real World Solutions to Common Problems at Work and Home. So, Steven, let me start by asking you, tell me about your journey and what was the inspiration into the world of honest communication and high performing teams?
It's been an interesting journey, and it's one that I never thought I would actually be at because I just didn't even know this could exist as an occupation.
Hmm.
But I was an agent for film and radio commercial directors and photographers and whatnot. And I did a seminar for photographers about communication and motivation,
Hmm.
and I loved it. And so eventually that's what I ended up doing. But the big jump for me was when a graphic designer heard me speak about basically around communication and then honesty. And she went home to her husband who worked for IBM. And that's how I got my big jump into corporations. And
Hmm.
as you know, and you've probably interviewed many people, if you can teach people things that produce results,
Yep.
you'll get rehired, which is really the most important thing. So we
Hmm.
can talk about that. And then there were other significant jumps in my career.
Fascinating. You've also, from a personal perspective, survived cancer and never navigated the 2008 recession simultaneously. How did some of these challenges influence the way you think?
It's a great question. So, uh, in 2008 is when I had that. I'm completely fine now, but that cancer bout, and then with the recession, what I realized is you can be outwardly focused and get preoccupied by things you can't control, which will bring you down, or you can focus on what you can control. So, like many people, I didn't initially react well. I was like, wow, cancer obviously blew me away, and the recession was really tough. But then I realized that if I have to focus on the only person I can control, which is myself. So I took that as an opportunity, which actually helped, eventually write the book Unconditional Power. But I took that as an opportunity to look at what I can control, which was a lot of things. For
Hmm.
example, I can't control that I have cancer, but I could control how I responded to it. I can't control that there was a recession, but I could control how I was going to respond to it. So I retooled my business, and from those years on, we've had our best years ever
Wow.
because I realize with every problem creates an opportunity. Are we focused on the problem or are we focused on the opportunity? And the
Hmm.
key is to focus on the opportunity.
Amazing. Thank you. So let's talk about your book, Unconditional Power. Tell me a little bit about the book. What was your hypothesis when you wrote it?
Well, have you ever noticed that when you're in a good mood, you're smarter? I mean,
Absolutely.
just think about it. You know, you wake up or you're having a great day and somebody throws you a challenge, you're like, I'm going to get this figured out.
Hmm.
But if we're in a down mood, we haven't slept well, or there's a lot of stresses going on, and somebody throws us even a mediocre or small problem, we can get so preoccupied to go, oh my gosh, here we go again. So
Hmm.
what I realized is how much mood really does impact productivity and results. And I
Right.
started down the journey. But let me just say something real quick. I started down this journey in all candor and all vulnerability is because I've suffered from moods. Now, I was not clinically depressed, but
Hmm.
I was the kind of person that would get thrown off track easily.
Hmm.
And that's not good in my profession. As a motivational speaker in communication, you got to bounce back.
Correct.
But I realized, so why are some people able to bounce back fast and I wasn't? And I studied that, and then that's what ultimately led to me getting the book done so I
Hmm.
could help other people. But initially it was to help out myself.
Hmm. And you're so right about mood. It can brighten up your day or ruin your day. But you use a term called mood discipline. Tell
Yes.
me about mood discipline and how can we discipline our moods?
Well, first of all, it's really important as leaders of our organization. And let me just say something about
Hmm.
leadership. We lead up, we lead down, we lead across, we
Yeah.
lead in our obviously business life, but also in our personal life. But we can drag other people down. So I've worked with clients where they'll walk in a room and they don't realize how their mood infects other people.
Mm,
Now,
mm,
everybody's responsible for their own mood. I agree with that, but it really we do impact other people. Like
mm.
for example, have you ever met somebody who walks in a room and they're unaware of how their negativity and their mood brings down other people? They're just unaware of it. In
Mm.
fact, they're the kind of people that when you see them walk in the room, you want to run for the exit.
Yes, yes.
So so it's really important.
Mm,
Mood discipline is about how we can change our moods because
mm.
it really does impact other
Right.
people. So back to myself, I realize that if I'm being brought down or if I allow myself to get down, it's going to impact my team and my company. So I have to have the discipline to bounce back and do things differently.
Mm. You also use a term called a power continuum.
Yes.
Tell me the concept of the power continuum and why most people live in a conditional state.
So, what I found out through research is I was able to identify that there are three primary overarching moods. The first mood is a powerless mood,
Mhm.
which we can all get into.
Mm,
That's the feeling of what difference can I make? I'm only one person here,
mm,
whether we're in a company or we're leading a company, but or, back to insurmountable or tough situations,
mm,
it's the state of resignation. The second state is what you've just identified, which is a conditionally powerful mood. And that's where we recognize we have power, but it's conditional on other things. That's where you hear people, even in
mm,
today's world,
mm,
especially, I
mm,
can do this as long as the economy responds,
mhm,
as long as tariffs are different, as long as we have the right talent, as long as we have the right resources. We
mm,
recognize we have power, but it's conditional. But the desirable state is unconditionally powerful. Unconditionally powerful is also the title of the book, but it's the state of there's a lot of conditions, but I'm going to focus 100% on what I can control. So I'm aware of the conditions. I'm
yeah.
not naive that things aren't existing, but
Mm,
I'm getting myself and my team focused 100% on what we
mm,
can do about it. And that kind of goes back to how I responded to the recession and cancer.
Well said. You also say that awareness is the first key to change.
It
How can
is.
leaders and teams cultivate greater self awareness without being judged?
So one of the things is even listening and watching this podcast, I would encourage people to bring this back to their team and show it because what I have found out is by making people aware of these three states, powerless, conditionally powerful, and unconditionally powerful, when people become aware of it, they will actually go to the essentially the unconditionally powerful state. And what I mean by that is people don't really want to be powerless. They often don't recognize that they're in that state.
Mm,
And then they don't know how to get out of it, but they want to get out of it. And so when I've taught this to thousands and thousands of people, what I have found out is when people are aware of these states, they will then start to realize I have to gravitate and go to the unconditionally powerful state. So whether they read the book or whatever the case, I would encourage people to bring these three states and ask the team, where are we at? And what are we going to do so we can be unconditionally powerful to respond to what we need to respond to?
mm. Stephen, you also talk about the strategies for unconditional power. Tell me a little bit more about these strategies. And if possible,
Well,
give me an example.
I'd love to. So there are many strategies in the book because one is, of course, make the unaware aware, which is what we're
Mm,
talking about, which actually can produce results. But there's so many other strategies, like I learned from my research and observing other people and working with other people.
mm,
A good example of this is reframing. I call it reframe to refocus.
mm,
We're all kind of aware that when we look at a situation, if we look at it differently, it might produce different results. So
mm,
I've identified the three reframes. So when you see a problem, you can do, there's a lot of reframes, but there are three primary ones. The first one is to reduce the frame. Reducing the frame is when you see a problem and people are like, oh my gosh, this is really a tall tale to fix. Like, this is a lot. Like,
mm,
let's say a massive change or massive transformation. What great leaders do is they simplify the change, they
mhm,
simplify the problem. They say, while there are many things we need to do, let's focus on these two key performance indicators, or let's
yeah,
focus on these this one activity or whatever, whether it's going to see the customer or responding within 24 hours or
Mhm.
creating a new product that we can bring to market, whatever it is, but take a problem and simplify it. There are
Right.
other reframes we could discuss, but that's an example of one in the book.
Very interesting. And my next question is, what are some of the common mistake leaders make when trying to empower their teams?
Well, first, believing that it's just going to happen.
Hmm.
Great leaders realize you have to empower people.
Yeah.
So, obviously you can't make somebody do something. I mean, I guess you could force them. That's not really great. But
Mm,
it's really about, it's up to us how our mood or mindset is going to impact others. And
mm,
so what can we do about it? Well, let's go back to the reframing. Another reframe is to enlarge the frame. So
mm.
how we can empower teams is by enlarging. Let me give you an example.
Yeah.
It's where there's a problem with the company or that we've gone through a tough situations. And great leaders will put it in a larger frame. They'll say, "What? While this is a problem, let's put this in the bigger frame. We have overcome a lot tougher situations,
Mm,
both personally and professionally.
mhm,
We're going to make this happen." Or another example is say, yes, while this is a problem, we owe it to our customers to do everything we can, and we've
mm,
brought so much value in the past, we're going to bring more value in the future. In other
mm.
words, take that problem and put it in a larger frame so people feel inspired. You ever listen to a speaker or a politician, let's say we do like, and they make us feel inspired because they show the big picture?
All right.
That's what I'm talking about, enlarging the frame. So
Mm,
one of the big mistakes is just thinking it's going to happen.
yeah.
What we can do about it is enlarging the frame, for example.
Mm. There's also a lot of talk about vulnerability. I'd love
Yes.
to get your perspective on what is the role of vulnerability to achieve unconditional power.
Well, vulnerability inspires honesty,
Mm,
and honesty produces results. So let me share what I mean by that.
mm,
Have you ever been around somebody that seems to have all the answers and
mm,
they don't share how they've ever been through any difficulties, and you're almost like, "Oh my gosh, well, that's great for them,
mm.
but how does it relate to me?" But what
Yeah,
I've found by great leaders is they're vulnerable. They share mistakes.
correct.
Like I'll give you an example in my own life.
Mm,
I was, well, there are many, but I'll give you one example. Early on in my career, I was doing an honest communication seminar, and I messed up so bad that
mhm,
people just left. Not everybody, but I'd say half the room. And I felt really, really down about that. And then I realized,
mm,
okay, I dissected what happened, and I realized I didn't know how to manage group dynamics. So I studied that. And then the next session I did was light years ahead. But the reason why I share that is
mhm.
I'll share that example when I'm teaching people about whether it's public speaking or training or with leaders going
Yeah,
through tough situations. I'm like, listen, stuff happens, but how do
mm,
we bounce back? But I want to show them that I'm in this together. Like
correct.
sometimes I make mistakes, like we
Mhm,
all do,
mhm,
but how I respond. So I like sharing my mistakes. But what I have found by us sharing mistakes, it inspires other people to share their mistakes, and then we can help them resolve those issues.
Great response. My next question is that in a world increasingly driven by metrics, how do you measure something as intangible as mood?
It is tough, isn't it?
It is.
Well, and let me just say something about mood. There's a
Mm,
difference between what we're saying about overall mood and morale versus somebody's emotional state. Let's face it, we get up and down, happy, sad. I mean, but mood is the prevailing morale, the prevailing
mm,
mood, you could say, and mindset. So, how we measure it is tough. There are climate surveys we can ask. For example, I have a client of mine that every time they turn on the computer, they ask their employees' job satisfaction. What it is as simple as on a scale from 1 to 10, how satisfied and happy are you in your job? And what would it take to make it a 10? I mean, they don't always do exactly that variation, but
yeah.
essentially that. And that's a way to measure your employees' mindset and mood. But the final way I really believe is most important is about achievement. Are we achieving the results? And if not, then we need to look at how are people's mood, because here's the thing, back to my original premise of the whole book, when
Mhm,
we're in a good mood, we're smarter, we're more innovative. So I need to be prevalent of that when
mhm,
I'm dealing with issues. I can give you examples of this, but
mhm.
essentially we do need to look at, are we achieving or not, and if not, maybe go back to the root cause of the mood and morale of the
Yeah,
organization.
yeah. So well said. And again, when I was reading reviews of your book, Unconditional Power, it got me thinking that is there a difference between positive thinking and unconditional power, or are they the same?
Well, there is. And in fact, I don't like using any more positive and negative thinking. I know I mentioned about negativity
Yeah.
earlier, but
Mm,
what I have found is optimistic and pessimism is much better than positive and negative. Let me explain why.
mm,
For a long time, I used to say positive thinking and negative thinking, but here's the problem.
mm,
People who think negatively will say, well, I'm just being realistic. I'm looking at the potential downfall. And you know what? They make a really good point.
mm,
So I don't really like that distinction. I like optimistic and pessimistic because optimistic and pessimistic people basically are both realistic.
mm,
But the difference is optimistic people view the future as things are going to work. A pessimistic will look at the
mm,
same facts and say we're doomed.
mm,
Optimism is really important in leadership. So when a pessimistic person might charge an optimistic person as saying, you're not realistic, their great response is, I am. We
mm,
do have a problem. I'm not
mm,
skirting that. But
mm,
I believe we can achieve things by focusing on what we're going to do about it. So let's focus on what we can do about it and how we can produce those results.
well said. You also speak about creating a powerful culture.
Mhm.
What are the pillars of such a culture?
There are many. We've identified five in the book, but let's focus on one that we haven't talked about yet, and that's getting the unsaid said. So let
Mm,
me explain why I'm saying that. What we've identified through extensive research is the biggest problem with all organizations, teams, and relationships
mm,
is lack of honest communication.
mm,
But what I mean by honest communication isn't the truth or lies, it's not the ethical component I'm
mm.
talking about. It's about what's not getting said.
Right.
How often have you thought, if they just told me, I could have done a lot better job?
Hmm.
If they had just told me, how about this? Somebody's upset with us, but they don't tell us, they tell other people.
Yeah.
Or a customer who doesn't move forward on the next situation because there was a problem, but they never let us know that.
Hmm.
Or an operational issue that our folks never told us about and we didn't fix. Or we lost a great employee that we thought, my gosh, if I had just known they were unhappy, I could have done something about it. So the biggest problem I've found through extensive research and almost 30 years in the business
Mm,
is the big problem is not what people say. It's actually what they're not saying.
mm,
So a critical element in building a powerful culture is how do you get the unsaid said? So
right.
we can talk about that, but that's a critical pillar and perhaps I would say the most important pillar of all.
And help me understand the meaning of getting the unsaid said in a culture.
Well, it's so what's not getting said. I'll give you. I'll push back on myself. I'll give you
Okay.
the other side to when I've been teaching this. How somebody will say, but that's not always true. I'll give you an example. I was
Mm,
doing a session, and then I'll talk to you about how we can deal with it.
mm,
I was doing a session, and this lady said, "Well, getting the unsaid said, speaking up and really getting it out there, can really not work well." And I said, "What's an example?" She said, "Okay, I have a peer who's dropping the ball, who's
mm,
messing up." So I
mm.
said, "Look, you're messing up. I'm getting my unsaid said." He didn't take it well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I said, "Well, why did you say that?" It's a
Mm,
fair point. She said, "Well, I care about him. I care about the mission.
mm,
I want us to all succeed, and I'm trying to do the best we can, and I want to see if I can help him."
mm,
And I said, "Did you say all of that?" She said, "No." And I said, "I would contend what tripped you up is not what you said, it's what you left out." Or
mm,
another example of this in leadership is I had a client of mine who we did the pre-research because we do a lot of research before working with teams because we do so much work with top leadership teams.
mhm,
And we found out that his people, his direct reports didn't really trust him. And we
mm.
peeled it. And the reason why they didn't trust him is because he asked a lot of questions and 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 so people were misinterpreting that or interpreting it as
Mm.
he doesn't trust us. So I said to him, "Look, this is what our this is what our analysis says. Why are you doing that?" And he said, "Well, because I'm trying to learn about people and I want to challenge them, but
Mm.
it's not because I don't trust them. I'm trying to really provoke thought. And at the very least, I want to learn about them and their
Sure.
perspective." I said, "Well, did you say all of that?"
Mm,
And he said, "No." So you know what we did is at the very beginning of the leadership session with his team, he said, "Look, let's get the unsaid said. I understand that you all think that I don't trust you. It's because I
mm,
ask you all these questions. Let me explain why I asked so many questions. And the great news about this he didn't have to change himself. People are
Mm,
like, oh, now I understand. So he got to ask as many questions as he want, and people interpreted correctly because, again, he got the rest of his unsaid said.
wow. What a great response. Thank you. And how do leaders intentionally create a conditional culture? What warning signs should they be watching for?
Language. And what
Okay.
I mean by that is people who will say conditional phrases. Like I
Mhm.
can get that done as long as,
Mm,
or how about this one? I I sent them the email. I made the phone call. I
mm,
sent the report.
mm,
So they're essentially saying it's now up to the other person.
mm.
And while we can't control other people, the only person we can control is ourselves.
Yeah.
So being aware of that language and then using another strategy that's out of the book that I want to give people
Mm,
is intentional disruption.
mhm,
Intentional disruption is you disrupt a pattern that's not working with a better question. So let me give you an example. I was doing a session for a client and there were about 30 people in the room and they were complaining about the very top leadership.
mm,
So I said to them, given that you're the only person that you can control, what would you suggest?
mm,
And they still complained.
mm,
I said it a couple more times, and finally somebody said, when I think about it, we could probably communicate better. It would be better if we weren't so negative and instead offer solutions.
mm,
If we were just asking what other people would want and how we can better work with them. And so by just using the art of questions, you can redirect an entire conversation.
yeah.
So what I mean by that is we have to listen for that language of going down the wrong or powerless to conditional state and
Mm,
redirect it through intentional disruption.
amazing. You also speak about flipping the power switch. And I love these little phrases that you have, put together because they will really make my viewers and listeners remember the conversation you and I are having now. So you speak about flipping the power switch, Stephen. Can it really be done instantly? And if so, give me an example of how your clients have experienced this transformation.
Well, it can absolutely happen in an instant. So first of all, we have to believe that it can.
Hmm.
The reason why we use the switch is because often people will say change and things take time. And I don't believe that at all. Let me give you an example, kind of in a personal way, but then we'll translate it to business.
Hmm.
I had a client of mine, and we were doing another team session and for him, and and it was on a break, and we are outside, and he's smoking, and he said, I've been smoking for decades. I need to quit smoking,
Hmm.
and then I said, yeah, it's not really great for your health and whatnot, not casting judgment, but it's, obviously you got to do something about that. And so we went back in and we finished the session. The next week he had a heart attack.
Hmm.
Now, the good news is he recovered,
Hmm.
but he's never had a cigarette since.
Amazing.
Now,
Hmm.
change happened in an instant. Why do I say this? Because I think we allow people to have excuses to ourselves, excuses with ourselves and others that it has to take a long time. And here's what I believe: change can happen in an instant if we really want it to. So
Hmm.
the reason why it takes so long is because a lot of times the truth is people aren't getting the unsaid said and they don't really want to change. They'll say they want, but they really don't want.
Yeah.
You and I both know we can change in an instant if we really want. I'm not saying it's simple and
Yeah.
easy, but it is like a switch. We can do something right now. Let me give you an example. Somebody says, I can't forgive somebody.
Hmm.
I'll say, okay, well, let me ask you a question. What would it take for you to forgive that person? Very often they haven't thought about that. They're
Hmm.
just stuck in lack of forgiveness. But
Correct.
when they start to think about that, it can lead to the path of instantly trying to change their dynamics. So there's so many things I believe in life, and it is like a light switch, and we can't allow people to have the excuses that it takes a long time when it can actually happen in an instant if we really want it to.
Hmm. I must remember this flipping the power switch when I make my New Year resolution this year and remember it on the 1st of January. But my last question for you, Stephen, if listeners were to take away just one message from your book, Unconditional Power, what would you want it to be?
Well, can I say two things?
Sure.
So, first, the overall awareness and that we need to be in a state of unconditionally powerful. And if we're going to lead people up, down, across, whatever, we need to set the example of being unconditionally powerful, because if we're not there, it's harder to get other people there. So we do make a difference. That's one thing. The second thing I want to say is also get the unsaid on appreciations. People are way too stingy on not appreciating employees, or even their boss. Sometimes somebody will say, well, and I'll ask them, and they'll say, well, my boss doesn't appreciate me. I will say, well, how often do you appreciate your boss? And I'm not saying to butter up to that person. What I'm saying is say appreciation. I've never had an employee, never heard of an employee ever, all the years, who's left a company because they were appreciated too much.
Correct.
Can't stand it. Got to get out of here. Too
Yes.
much appreciation.
Yeah.
So why I'm saying that is get the unsaid also with appreciation. When somebody's not doing a lot of things right and they do one thing right, appreciate at least that. It starts that journey, because what I have found out is people do more what they're appreciated for. So appreciate and catch people when they're doing something right, and you're going to see they're going to do more of that activity. So appreciation.
Fascinating. And on that note, and your two amazing thoughts, set the example, because we make the difference, and be generous with your appreciation. Thank you, Stephen, for talking to me about your own journey. Thank you for speaking to me about your book, Unconditional Power. I think I learned many new things from you. And just as I mentioned, love your 2-word and 3-word phrases, mood, discipline, power continuum, creating a powerful structure, flipping the power switch, and so many more. Thank you for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
Thank you. And thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.